Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 799. 799. Yow. I'm Tom Quigley, your host. Today, we feature an essay on why all communication is not collaboration. It's a commonly held belief that complex problems require collaborative efforts to solve. Hard to argue. Couple that with an almost fad-like insistence that if a little collaboration is good, more is better, leads to everything being deemed collaboration. We can do better with a little effort. We also have a visit from Jon M Quigley and his Alpha and Omega product development column. Mr. Quigley and I talk about prioritization as micromanagement and how if you're not there to pick up the pieces when work is pushed into an organization, you have a poor perspective. The essay, Communication or Collaboration by Thomas M. Quigley Jr. and Megan E. Quigley. It is a commonly held belief that complex problems require collaborative efforts to solve. Couple that with an almost fad-like insistence that if a little collaboration is good, then more is better. This leads to everything being deemed collaboration. I heard a leader suggest that the Q&A session after a speech in an all-hands meeting, several thousand people involved, was collaboration. The statement was either posturing or conflation. We can do better. Defining the two concepts in simple terms, communication is exchanging information or ideas. Collaboration is working together to achieve a shared goal. Both the relationship and the differences between the two become apparent. Collaboration requires working to achieve something together. Communication is required. It's part of making that happen. Returning to the Q&A session, there was no real common goal, unless of course it was to escape to lunch. It was a long meeting. The goal of the Q&A was to ensure clarity of the message of the leader. The leader may have collaborated with people to construct the speech and to prep for the Q&A, but interacting with the audience was not collaboration. Using these definitions, I was not shocked that a quick audit of the meetings I participated during the last week suggested that most of the meetings were information sharing and not collaborative. The 3 stand-up meetings I attended used the classic 3 questions: what I did, what am I going to do, and do I have any blockers kind of concept. The meetings passed relevant information, but nobody worked together during the session. I also attended a team meeting, a staff meeting, and 3 presentations. It might have been a slow week, but the only collaborative meeting I had was with my co-author of Mastering Work Intake. We spent the time planning the marketing of our next workshop. Collaborative meetings 1, non-collaborative meetings 8. Not a great margin. The information in information sharing meetings may be used to achieve a common goal or later to work together, but the act of sending the data is not collaborative. The knee-jerk reaction is to ban all meetings, valuable or not, and perhaps some should go. However, I will not argue the value of the information communicated in any of the 8 meetings that I went to that weren't collaborative. But most of these could have been recorded and consumed while walking the dog, assuming people would have listened and paid attention. Despite the evidence that most meetings are not collaborative, we are still in love with the concept. A quick search for job postings for Agile coaches and Scrum Masters all included specific requirements for collaboration. I found phrases like collaborative mindset, facilitate relentless collaboration, and facilitation at scale littered throughout the job descriptions. The best, and I am being sarcastic, included collaboration 17 times in one job description. None included the requirement for being an excellent asynchronous communicator or non-collaborative meeting facilitator. I would suggest that that skill might be more important, just not very cool. In late 2022, a C-level executive proudly told me that he believed that solving his complex business problems required teamwork and collaboration. He went on to state in an all-hands meeting, not more than a few minutes later, he did not want to see people in meeting rooms talking unless necessary. It felt like very mixed messages. Thoughts, comments, all welcome. Please feel free to reach out to us at spamcastinfo@gmail.com. We look forward to the conversation. Next, we're going to talk about, by the way, the requirements for effective collaboration. Jon M Quigley, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
As always, it's really, I probably laugh my hardest when we are having these discussions because we end up going into some fatalistic stuff occasionally.
Well, or different stuff. I do want to suggest that, I know this was from the last time we talked, but a great example of poor metrics cause bad, or combination of metrics and remuneration cause bad behavior, is go to most any restaurant. Not always true, but in most restaurants, the people in the front of the house get all the tips. And the people in the back of the house, the people actually doing all the work to create the food, get none of the tips. Yeah. And so therefore they're and generally don't get paid very well either. Other than
maybe a little bit better than the front of the house, but not when you include the tips.
No, generally not actually. Other than the top chef. So there's generally a lot of angst in between those two things. There are organizations that are really trying. It's just like, okay, all the tips go into a pool, period. Yeah. And it gets split across the entirety of the organization. So that you have to work together. You have to work together so that it gets staged properly, then delivered properly, not staged partially. I'm going to bring out 4 plates, 5 people at the table. You bring out 4 and the 5th one, well, we'll get to it when we get to it kind of crap. Yeah. Not that happened recently to me. That's why I remember this. Jon, in what I'd like to actually talk about this month, the idea of prioritization as a tool to micromanage people. And I know that in reality, prioritization is a good thing. Prioritization is good. Sequencing is good. But when can it become a force for evil?
Yeah, I forget, is it a Polish proverb? No, it's Spanish. He who grasps it much loses all, or something like that, to paraphrase, which is part of this prioritization theme you're talking about. One of the times I was working at a company, we were working at some stuff that came in from the marketing guys, and there was a long list of stuff, and all the engineers around the table were like, "This is big. I'm not even sure we can fit this in our schedule in the time they want." And so I'm saying, okay, what are the most important things? Let's focus on the most important parts. So we can at least deliver, pare away the less important, and we can have a good chance at making the most important to the marketing folks appear at the time that they wish it to appear.
But Jon, my list of 20 things, the first 19 are the number one priority.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. So you're kind of hurt now in this regard. And what you're essentially doing, especially if you're pushing a hard date, is you're setting up one of two things. Either your people are going to try to hit that, and they're going to probably be working some ridiculous hours around the clock and maybe circumventing some certain key processes that you should not otherwise like. Yes. Okay. Now we're going into a place where I have lots of historical, I don't want to use the word rage because I think that's just too big. But let's just say irritation, because that's the thing that gets trumped, right? Okay, so we'll take all the development time we need, and you need to do that, for sure. We're not changing the delivery date. Well, maybe we don't need to do that, though, and we'll end up testing something that arguably should take multiple loops and weeks of work in each one of those loops and we'll distill it down to one loop of less than weeks of work, and we'll launch it. And then we'll go to the test department and say, you guys are not good at your job. You let this thing get into the field when the test coverage was maybe 30%, if you're lucky, of what the total test scope should have been. And so that what, in my experience, the people who often clean up those messes are not exactly the people who create those messes.
In that circumstance, how did you get into that bad place?
Usually it's a fixed date thing and it's a fixed scope thing. Nobody wants to entertain reducing the scope to be able to deliver something at that particular date. What many people seem to think in business is that I can demand a certain thing to happen at a certain date. And it doesn't matter. It's just going to happen. And it may be because the people that are above us have a long track record of successes, perhaps. And perhaps they pushed the envelope and they got lucky in some cases to make those successes. So when it comes time to their next thing, you need to have this done in this amount of time and all of the scope, because they have some hit track record that says that can actually happen. But just because it's happened once or twice for you doesn't mean it's going to happen ever again. And it's going to come at some cost.
I knew someone once who won the lottery twice in a year. Not the big chunks of them, but enough, right? He won the lottery twice in a year. I'm firmly convinced that he's blown everything that he won in both those jackpots over the next 15 to 20 years trying to win again. I think you're absolutely onto something, and that is people, natural, what is sort of a version of natural selection happens. People are successful. They are successful at browbeating, at telling people exactly what to do, using prioritization and sequencing as micromanagement. It works. It works once. Maybe it works twice, and they get promoted.
Yeah.
It may never work again.
And it may not have actually worked in those two instances. Sorry to interrupt, but
especially if somebody else is cleaning up their mess.
Yes, I've seen instances where what the aftermath is a disaster from those underneath, but those above look at it as, hey, this was actually a success, and they go ahead and that person gets bumped to the next rung. Meanwhile, the people underneath them know what they saw and what they had to clean up.
Okay, we're back to a conversation that we started a few months ago, and that is blame goes down, flows down very easily. It's sort of like water, albeit any sort of problems and bad information, especially in steep hierarchies, doesn't flow up very easily.
No.
So
it does not.
I get my win, and if there are a number of dead bodies that I have to dispose of, nobody's ever going to know.
Yeah, exactly. And that information up is the key thing, and it's probably one of the best reasons for a flat-ish hierarchy.
Okay, I think we're on to something. Say more about flat hierarchies. Why is that important?
I like to call it lowerarchy, actually, because it's really not. But it's a joke. But yeah, because we're not talking about multiple 7 levels from the bottom to the top. We're talking something that's more like 2 or 3. That the distance from a person doing the work at a hierarchy level and the lead person at the whole of the entity might be 3, a delta of 3. One person between me and them, and it's not just that, because you could probably get by with the with a stretched hierarchy if you have an organization that prizes candid talk and active promotion of what's seen at the bottom to the top and what's seen at the top to the bottom. And that's maybe kind of difficult.
I recently did some time at an organization where I think I was physically on site for 11 months. at the headquarters, I don't think I ever saw an executive. Ever.
Yeah. That's more to your point about the hierarchy. If you have a hierarchy that's in the same office and you have good communication, which you can work to maybe clear, clean communication, you can make that work. But if they're not in that office and they never talk to the people doing the work, then
they had their own entrances. They had the executive dining room. I assume they had the executive toilet because I never, either that or they're
robots and they don't go.
Well, there you go. They're aliens.
Aliens.
I've been in organizations that have very long hierarchies, but I saw the CEO walking through the organization on multiple occasions. At least once a month, you'd run into him in the lunch line. Actually, person who ended up taking over for him, I ran into her all the time in the company store as she was stocking up on liquid refreshment and didn't have her admin, and I'm sure she had an administrative assistant. She didn't have them do it. She was around just because she wanted to say hello and see people. That was their culture. You could talk to them. The expectation was that you did. I don't know that it's hierarchy per se. I think it's when they get really structured and everybody's fighting politically. So it's like, you better not talk to my boss unless I know exactly what you're going to say, and I'll make sure that you say it right, or I'll make sure you only say the things that are important to me. Yeah.
Yeah. That and that's part of that whole clear communication thing. I worked at a company that did good and bad here, and the mixed message essentially was a wash. For example, it's a Swedish company, and they have something called fika, which is it's a Swedish word. It's awful close to another Swedish word that you should never use. But fika, F-I-K-A, means like a coffee break. And they would have these coffee breaks. I don't remember, like once a month, every couple of weeks. Some executive would meet with a group of people, cannon fodder, I like to call, like somebody like me, and they would talk about things, talk about work-related stuff. And there you have some really good things that if you routinely did this, maybe you make things better. But on the other hand, you routinely do something in violation of that, or directly contrary to that. And that is when somebody brings something to the table as an issue or something that's not great, the verbiage has to be worded so softly that the fact that you're telling them, we really got a big problem here. You could listen to this person say this, and you would never walk away that, hey, this is a pretty big issue. We probably need to jump on this, because the language has been so softened because they expect it to be so softened. That was the culture of the company. It's a non-combative kind of thing, and anything that would raise anybody's blood pressure is taken as a combative thing, even if maybe it's not. And that wasn't helpful.
No. So mixed messages. Jon, can prioritization cause part of this problem?
Sure. Yeah, for sure it can, especially if your goal is to force 10 pounds of something into a 3-pound bag. And most of the time that's what's happening there. And this goes back to our metric discussion some months back. I'm rewarded based on a particular thing. And so I want that particular thing to happen. I'd like a new deck on my house, or maybe I want a boat, or who knows. And so I will use those prioritization techniques to kind of force the hands of those doing the work.
I remember the Dilbert where Wally said, I'm going to code myself a minivan because I get paid to find defects. Jon, if people wanted to continue the conversation, how would they go about doing that?
You can just email me at Jon, and I realize it's probably need to know how to spell it because it's not Jon, it's Jon. Jon.Quigley at valuetransform.com. We've been doing this for many years. I don't think I've ever pointed that out. And then
I think I got it wrong. For a while.
maybe way back when.
Oh yeah,
But that's right. The show notes.
Yeah, you fixed me. I'm never having any more babies. No, I'm kidding.
I'm sorry to hear that, man.
Well, I'm not, because my wife and I aren't. All right, John.
You could be cloned, though.
Clones. Dolly the sheep. As always, we go far afield.
Yes, we do.
In Reread Saturday News, I ran across the quote, "I wasted time, now doth time waste me." It's from Shakespeare, Richard II, as I was listening to Deep Work, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World by Cal Newport. The quote and the content of Newport's book made me decide to feature my second time through Deep Work on our reread feature. This week, we tackle the logistics and introduction of the book. Please grab a copy of Deep Work and read along. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 800. 18 years ago, I wouldn't have guessed that I would be doing this still at Spamcast 800. We'll feature Johanna Rothman interviewing Jeremy Willets and I. We discussed mastering work intake. Have you heard of that book? Buy a copy. Any conversation with Johanna ends up being a masterclass. I look forward to spending this milestone with Johanna, Jeremy, and you.